What really happened to Miss Elizabeth? That's a question that still lingers in the minds of WWE fans. From her sudden and unexpected death to everything she went through before it, her story is filled with heartbreak and struggle. She faced domestic abuse, personal battles, and so much more. And in the end, her life came to a truly tragic end. So let's take a look back and see what went wrong, and how things led Miss Elizabeth to such a heartbreaking fate. So let's start by talking about her death, because that's the part that still leaves fans with so many questions. On May 1st, 2003, in Marietta, Georgia, Lex Luger made a desperate 911 call. He told the operator that Elizabeth wasn't breathing. He tried mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but it didn't work. Paramedics rushed her to Wellstar Kennestone Hospital, but it was already too late. At just 42 years old, Miss Elizabeth was pronounced dead. The medical examiner later revealed the cause: acute toxicity. In other words, a deadly mix of painkillers and vodka. Officially, her death was ruled an accident. But to this day, many fans and even people close to her can't help but ask, was it really just an accident? Or was it the result of all the pain, stress, and heartbreak she was carrying with her in those final months of her life? Because when you look at what Elizabeth was going through just before her death, it paints a very dark picture. Just weeks earlier, on April 19, 2003, police were called to her home after a violent domestic dispute with Lex Luger. According to reports, he had struck her in the garage of their townhouse. When officers arrived, they found Elizabeth battered, 2 black eyes, a bump on her head, and a cut lip. Luger was arrested and charged with misdemeanor battery, though he was quickly released on a $2,500 bond. But things didn't calm down after that. Just 2 days later, on April 21st, Luger was in trouble again, this time for driving under the influence. He had rear-ended another car while driving his Porsche. Witnesses and officers said he had slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, and couldn't even find his driver's license when asked. Inside the car, they also found a 9mm handgun, and sitting right there in the passenger seat was Miss Elizabeth, who ended up being sent home in a taxi. To make matters worse, Luger wasn't even supposed to be driving in the first place. His license had already been suspended because he failed to appear in court earlier that year for charges related to driving with expired tags and no proof of insurance. It was one bad decision after another, and Elizabeth was caught right in the middle of all of it. So when you step back and look at the whole situation, you can see why so many people believe her death wasn't just some random accident. Sure, the toxicology report said it was a deadly mix of painkillers and alcohol. But the truth is, Elizabeth had been living in chaos. Between the domestic abuse, the legal troubles, and the constant turmoil in her personal life, it's not hard to imagine that depression and despair played a huge role in what happened that night. Her glamorous image on TV as the First Lady of Wrestling was gone, and behind closed doors, she was facing pain and struggles that few really knew about. Now, let's turn our attention to her career, a journey that was nothing short of eventful and really highlighted just how much potential she carried with her. Miss Elizabeth's career in wrestling started in a pretty unique way. While she was working at a gym, she met Randy Poffo, better known to fans as the legendary Macho Man, Randysavage. The two ended up getting married in 1984, and not long after, Elizabeth began dipping her toes into the wrestling world. She first appeared as a TV announcer for International Championship Wrestling, where Savage was working at the time. Then came the big moment. On June 17, 1985, Randysavage made his official debut in the World Wrestling Federation. Back then, WWF had this storyline where all the managers were trying to sign Savage as their client. But instead of choosing any of the established names, Savage shocked everyone when he brought out a mysterious, beautiful woman to be his manager. That woman was Miss Elizabeth, and her debut instantly set her apart. From that point forward, Elizabeth wasn't just Savage's wife. She was his manager, his partner at ringside, and part of the storylines that defined the WWF in the mid to late 80s. One of her first big roles came during Savage's feud with George the Animal Steele. The storyline was simple but unforgettable. Steele fell in love with Elizabeth, which drove Savage crazy and sparked one of the most popular feuds of the 1980s. Fans couldn't get enough of it, and Elizabeth became a major part of the drama, but her role only grew bigger. When Savage lost his Intercontinental Championship to Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3, another feud began. This time with the Honky Tonk Man. Honky took things to a whole new level by shoving Elizabeth to the ground during one of their matches, which led her to run backstage and bring out Hulk Hogan to help Savage. This was the start of the famous Mega Powers alliance between Hogan and Savage, with Elizabeth often caught right in the middle. Elizabeth wasn't just a manager, she was the emotional core of the stories. At SummerSlam 1988, she became the team's secret weapon, distracting the bad guys at the perfect time and helping the Mega Powers win. But that alliance also planted the seeds for one of the biggest storylines in wrestling history, the breakup of Savage and Hogan. Tension kept building, especially with Hogan's overprotective behavior toward Elizabeth. Things came to a head in early 1989 when Elizabeth was accidentally knocked out during a match. Hogan rushed to her aid, leaving Savage alone in the ring. Savage was furious, and this set up their famous clash at WrestleMania 5. The feud was fueled by Savage accusing Hogan of lusting after Elizabeth, and Elizabeth was placed in the impossible position of choosing sides. She tried to stay neutral, but in the end, Hogan won the title, and Savage replaced her with sensational Sherry as his new manager. After that, Elizabeth's appearances became more limited, but whenever she showed up, she made an impact. She briefly managed Hulk Hogan, even tripping Sherry at SummerSlam 1989 to help Hogan and Brutus Beefcake defeat Savage and Zeus. Then, in 1990, she returned once again, this time alongside Dusty Rhodes and Sapphire in a mixed tag team feud against Savage and Sherry. Once again, Elizabeth's presence was enough to electrify the crowd. Then came perhaps her most emotional storyline. At WrestleMania 7 in 1991, Elizabeth made a surprise return during Savage's retirement match against the Ultimate Warrior. After Savage lost, Sherry attacked him in the ring, and Elizabeth ran out to save him. The moment ended with Savage and Elizabeth reuniting in one of the most heartfelt scenes in WWE history. Fans were literally in tears. That led to one of the most famous on-screen weddings in wrestling, dubbed the Match Made in Heaven at SummerSlam 1991. Of course, in typical wrestling fashion, even their wedding was crashed by villains like Jake, the Snake Roberts, and The Undertaker, sparking another feud. By 1992, Elizabeth found herself in the middle of a heated rivalry between Savage and Ric Flair, who claimed that Elizabeth had been his before she ever met Savage. Flair even showed fake photos of himself with her to stir up the drama. At WrestleMania 8, Elizabeth played a huge role once again, standing by Savage's side as he defeated Flair for the WWF Championship. Sadly, this was also the final chapter of her WWF run. By the summer of 1992, Elizabeth and Savage had divorced in real life, and she quietly stepped away from wrestling. The WWF even printed a statement from Savage in their magazine, thanking fans for their support. And just like that, Elizabeth disappeared from the spotlight. But then came a comeback that no one really saw coming. On January 23, 1996, Miss Elizabeth returned to wrestling, this time managing both Randysavage and Hulk Hogan at Clash of the Champions 32. It was a big moment because fans never thought they'd see her back, especially alongside the same men she had once been caught in the middle of. But just 3 weeks later, everything flipped upside down. At Super Brawl 6, Elizabeth shocked the world when she turned on Randysavage. She helped Ric Flair defeat him, aligning herself with Flair and even joining him as co-manager of the legendary Four Horsemen, alongside Woman. It was the first time fans really saw a darker, colder side of Elizabeth. That shift in her character continued when she became tied to the New World Order. By September 1996, Elizabeth was standing with Hulk Hogan in the NWO, but things weren't so simple. Even though she was part of the group, it was obvious she still had feelings for her ex-husband Savage. And when Savage himself joined the NWO in February 1997, Elizabeth was right back by his side. Together, they reignited one of WCW's hottest rivalries, going head-to-head with Diamond Dallas Page and his wife, Kimberly. This feud stretched across 1997 and gave Elizabeth a spotlight of her own, making her more involved in storylines than ever before. But things didn't stay steady for long. In May 1998, she sided with NWO Wolfpack, only to betray Savage again a month later by switching over to NWO Hollywood. This back-and-forth drama kept her in the spotlight, but also showed just how unpredictable her role had become. For a time, she was even paired with Eric Bischoff, accompanying him to the ring and taunting Savage, who eventually snapped back by coldly saying he was over her a long time ago. Then came one of her most infamous storylines. On the January 4th, 1999 episode of Nitro. Elizabeth was seen talking to police detectives, claiming that Goldberg had been stalking her, even saying he harassed her at a water cooler. Later that night, Goldberg was arrested for aggravated stalking, costing him his scheduled title match. But the twist came fast. Elizabeth admitted she had lied. She wasn't a victim at all. She was just a pawn of the NWO to set Goldberg up and keep him away from the ring. After that, her role in WCW shifted again. She took a brief leave in April 1999, but by September she was back, this time at Lex Luger's side. Elizabeth now became part of Luger's matches and storylines, including a bizarre stipulation where her hair was on the line against Rey Mysterio's mask at Super Brawl 9. But things went sideways when Mysterio slammed a limo door into Luger's arm, injuring him and forcing him out of the match. During Luger's recovery, Elizabeth stepped away from the road for a while. When Luger healed up, Elizabeth returned to WCW in late 1999. But this wasn't the same quiet, reserved Elizabeth fans were used to. She was now much more physically involved than ever before. She even wrestled her first official match against Meng, which ended in a draw. At Starrcade 1999, she showed just how ruthless she could be by smashing Sting with his own baseball bat. By February 2000, she was back in a managerial role, this time helping to form Team Package alongside Luger and Ric Flair. The trio didn't last long, but Elizabeth stuck around in feuds against people like Vince Russo, Daphne, and Kimberly Page. She even had her second ever match facing Daphne on May 8, 2000, and then worked with Kimberly for the rest of the month. But by mid-2000, Elizabeth's time in WCW was winding down. Her final appearance came on the May 29, 2000 edition of Monday Nitro. A few months later, on August 17th, her contract expired, and just like that, Elizabeth quietly walked away from wrestling for good. That's all for today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any future updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.